Because it's sort of a stock take opportunity, kind of every year, to see how far we've got at embedding evidence-based policing everywhere in policing, which is basically what I try and do, is to make sure there is no escape and that it's everywhere. And innovators like the people in this room have got support and have got a system that doesn't kind of treat them as completely alien when they go back home. If you go back a few years, we were concentrating a lot just on the innovators and sort of expecting them to pull the change through. A lot of that you get in the sort of international development literature. It tells you that that should work. But our culture has kind of got a big old drag on it, I think, and we realised relatively quickly that we needed to do more on the wider system. So we try and balance those two things, like thinking about the innovators, but also about everybody in policing and how we can make it part of what they do. So that's the just right, I think, in accordance with the sort of theme of the conference, is how do you help the innovators, but also make it part of everything that policing does. What are we as an organisation? So we're for England and Wales only, so not for the whole of the UK, and our role is basically about knowledge, learning, and what's the other one? Standards, that's it. Knowledge, learning and standards. And embedding the evidence base in all three of those is sort of what my main kind of focus is. In terms of the problem we were set up to solve, if you want to think about it that way, it's sort of sharing, accessing, using evidence. I mean, those are the things I think we all kind of share in this room, have been for years considered to be sort of a really perennial problem. And we've got that nice kind of combination of roles. So we've got the professional body part, which is about helping everybody to achieve their potential on the one hand and be part of creating the evidence base, and then the what works side, which is sort of about how do we get it into standards, how do we get it into knowledge, how do we get it into learning. So we're sort of unique. I'm quite envious of the New Zealand team and Simon Williams and the team. Also envious of your piano playing skills in Selwyn Bar last night. Very good, yeah. We envious of that sort of operational link. They've got a very direct operational link there, which is fantastic. We don't have that in the college, of course, but we do have other things. So we've got other levers, and so we sort of form part of a system. So I tried to console myself with that when I was envying their sort of direct operational connection. Sort of give a sense of what we are in numbers. There are lots of numbers there, but the ones maybe I would point to and pull out, things that people maybe know less about. So there's a big accreditation programme of things like undercover and firearms and public order. So all the people involved in those, we have a big role in making sure that they're supported to deliver to some very specific standards, and any of you who are involved in that will know all about that. We've got a big role in recruitment and in the assessment of individuals and making sure that that's done in an evidence-based way. And little sidebar, it's really interesting when we shifted to an online assessment through COVID, you saw an improvement in the performance of people from minority ethnic backgrounds, not expected, and we don't really know the reasons why. You can speculate on what some of that might have been, but that was a really big shift in terms of being able to see better success. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then over on the right there, so the big numbers around people who come through our learning side. So people think of us as a college as a place where you go and do learning and training, and we do some of that in Brighton and in Harpley Hall up in the north. So that 7,000 number covers a lot of that, lots of niche and specialist learning and things where it makes sense to have it done in one place. But in England and Wales otherwise, a lot of this is done by out in forces. So forces we will set the curriculum, but they will do the delivery in their own forces. And that creates lots of interesting opportunities in terms of them innovating, but also challenges about how to make sure we're reaching consistent standards, which I was thinking about when I was listening to the really good stuff from Queensland. We've got some work going on in the UK which is trying to mirror that. So stocktake, how are we getting on? How are we doing? Some of the things I'm proud of, so I think this is great. We worked with the team, the NPCC team, in developing an outcomes framework. So our role in the development of the Police Race Action Plan was the evaluation and evidence work stream. But for a little while we didn't have a plan because we were developing it. So we were like, what should we do then? But I said, okay, look, we need to know what we're evaluating towards. So let's have a think about what would the outcomes be if you were taking an evidence-based approach. What should be the outcomes of the plan? according to what the evidence tells us. So we wrote all those down. Paul Quinton did a really good job of putting this together, and that became the sort of guiding structure for the plan. So that felt fantastic. We managed to put the evidence right in the beginning of the plan, and now there is research under every single work stream. It's kind of a really core part of what's being done. There's lots of exciting opportunities there to do testing and evaluation. If anybody's interested in any of those opportunities, then do get in touch, because we'd love to hear from you. And I think that's actually, you can hear that when we were listening to the guys, women, I should say, because they were people. I get told off for using guys. Oops. The women from the VORG programme earlier. So also jointly with us, it's a very research friendly approach, and I think that you can really see that shift nationally. It's starting to become really standard, which is brilliant. And then one of the other things we're doing is using, this is the UCL framework, the COM-B framework, where they talk about capability, opportunity and motivation being the key ingredients to achieve behaviour change. We're using this to really try and dig into how you design interventions when we're doing our business planning. Because you know, we've got this tendency to say, we'll do X intervention. It's quite a big thing, like we'll do some learning or we'll set a standard, but actually if you dig into the detail behind that, there's lots of quite specific things that you might need to do that are really quite, they're quite picky and specific. And this was a piece of work done unpicking what would be the very particular things if you were trying to improve career progression for people from minority ethnic backgrounds. Take out the things that would be for them, perhaps support for them individually, mentoring, those kinds of things. What other things are there? And what can you find in the evidence base that can help you with that? To think about how do you change both the capability, the opportunity and the motivation of the people involved. Because we often focus on capability, on learning, but not on opportunity and not on motivation. And I'll come back to that again as well, because I think that's still a problem for us. So good, happy with that. Some quite good progress, it feels like, in terms of embedding. In terms of knowledge and how well we're doing on access, so access and sharing, we're getting some quite good figures in terms of people accessing things on our website. It's reasonable, it's okay. And we're doing quite a lot of topic-focused briefings, so bringing all the evidence together around specific topic areas which people are using and finding helpful as far as we're told. But we need loads more of those, because actually the number of topics that are covered is quite small. So I think there's an opportunity for that there. I was thinking about it when I was listening to New Zealand, and I think there's also the Met team and others for us to join up a bit more and think about how we do those topic-focused briefings as more international documents. There might be some possibilities there, I think. And then also we're trying to do in that just right bit of being focused on the evidence base, but also on who else and more widely needs things. So that VORG toolkit is actually very legislative focused. It's very much what are all the pieces of legislation that you can use with VORG offences. It's not really so much about research evidence, actually. It's just about bringing all that information together in one place so people can access it quickly. So knowledge sharing, loads more to do. Learning, so here I focused obviously on the evidence-based side of things, putting things in place which can help officers and staff to add to the evidence base is what I'm really interested in. It's the model, obviously, for this programme. I think it is the big part of the answer in the future. PCDA, we're really starting to hear from, it's challenging, but we're starting to hear from people the difference it makes to them following that different initial curriculum, which includes some really overt evidence-based stuff. It's got problem solving in it, it's got evidence-based policing in it. They do structured projects that are focused on using evidence, and we're getting feedback from them that it's really, it's helping them, but it's quite challenging, the capacity that they've got within their working time. So we're trying to look at ways to help the higher education providers and forces to make that not too much of a strain for people. I think that's very interesting, isn't it? At the risk of sounding like a geek, says the person who did the bursary. It is a risk, isn't it, policing, to sound like a geek? Oh, that's definitely a risk. But we're starting to get more and more of those stories and more of those role models. They all come off this programme. People like Stacey, have gone through that process and have actually taken action and embedded. I think we can do loads more communication around those people and what fantastic role models they are. And then in terms of the standards side of it, so the just right bit about the use of evidence, we try and balance this. We do evidence-based guidelines. Those are the ones we've produced already. So we do formal evidence review, and then we have a panel of practitioners and other experts, including academics, and they argue about what does the evidence tell us and what should we be writing down about this particular topic, and how are we going to help people to implement it, and also say a little bit more about that. So, okay, that's the knowledge, the learning, the standards, how are we getting on? So these are from a little survey we do every now and then, and you usually get around about 15,000 responses or something like that from people out in policing to a series of questions about stuff we're trying to do in the college. So the top one looks quite encouraging, right? So it's kind of that sometimes, often or always using research evidence to inform decision making. So that's officers, it's just over 60%, PCSOs and police staff is over, other police staff is over 80%. But the bottom one, so actively being encouraged by your supervisor, the figure's much, much lower. And we know how much that matters, how much the role of supervisors matters. It's a core theme, something that comes back all the time. I'll say a bit more about perennial themes as well in a minute. So we did a review on effective supervision, and what does the evidence tell us about that? So again, with that practitioner panel to help look at the evidence, what can we say about it? And the good new thing, so this is like everybody knows this, right? So supervisors, leaders, they're so important, is that there is actual evidence on performance. So if you're trying to pitch this to people who are a little bit, well, is this a bit fluffy? There is strong evidence now, it's good evidence that says, if your supervisors are doing the right things, like this is from guideline 4, acting as a role model, you will see performance improve. And, you know, not just that, but job satisfaction and other things. Then it's, yeah, okay, but where's the time to do this? We don't have time for this, that kind of issue comes up. So we've got case study examples from forces. That's the other thing we try and do to help with the implementation of the guidelines, is get ideas from forces of what they've done to try and make a bit of space to do more supervision, kind of really the active stuff that officers really benefit from. And there's a whole list of them there, the different things. I think one of the ones at the top, and especially the Cheshire one, is particularly focused on that issue about time and making space, which is such a perennial theme all the time that I think we have to concentrate on it quite hard to think about how we can help with that. So I was thinking then about this issue about broadening involvement. So people who are frightened of the language of evidence-based policing or academia or research or whatever. So we talk a lot in some of our wider communication stuff about innovation, rather than talking about evidence-based policing. Because, of course, once you've got them to tell you what their good idea is, you can say, what a fantastic idea. Would you like to test it? Come this way into a bursary. Come this way over here into a supported research project. And there's also other places where we're kind of linking in with other people, like the Impact Lab. So that's digital. We're trying to create sort of one front door for connections on digital, and also trying to concentrate a bit. This is the next bit, which I think we're doing less well on this. Stacey in her new role will be really good on this because she's going to be part of a network of 7 forces. So we're looking forward to seeing if we can have some fun with that. But it's replication. It's, you know, we've got one force has done some fantastic thing, but nobody else in the country has done it. And until a second force does it, quite often the other forces are a little bit about it. So getting better at getting a few forces at the beginning to test the same thing, or quickly getting another force to do it, and giving people credit and incentivising replication is a real biggie, and something we could think about on this programme as well, is like the incentives to not just have a new big idea. I think you're quite good at it actually on the programme, of people kind of building on other people's work, but I think we need more of that, because if you don't get replication, it's really hard to persuade some of the sceptics to pick things up, because surprisingly they do actually pay attention to the evidence base. Sometimes people think, people who are sceptical, they're not interested in the evidence base, but actually they often are, and they will, if they're like maybe 4 or 5 forces have got evidence of having done it, it does make a difference. So also trying to reach out is people who are kind of, maybe there's a Thames Valley Journal, which I'm sure many of you have read, which is really great, and they said to us, why don't you do a national evidence-based journal? We couldn't really kind of go down that road because it felt like at the time we were being accused of being too academic, so we needed to reach out more and be more, open our connections to people who maybe wouldn't think of themselves as being involved in academia. So we've done a more magazine focused piece. It's kind of written and peer reviewed by officers and staff for them, and it's got all sorts of bits in it. So it's got some long reads, research pieces, but also short bits, ideas, like Jade's one in this one is about creating a sort of debrief process after somebody gets dismissed for gross misconduct. Anonymous debriefing process to find out what were the flags and could we have learnt with that, which links with what we were talking about just earlier. And what's great about this is the people that run this inside the college, as soon as people express an interest, write something down or kind of get involved, they're like, oh, would you like to think about a bursary, or have you thought about doing this? And so they become part of the network. And so even if they didn't think of themselves as part of this sort of thing when they start, it quickly connects into a wider system. So I mentioned the Perennial Challenges, and Andy mentioned this for anybody who was here earlier. These are the things that which keep coming back, and we've found these in HMIC-FRS inspections. They get repeated over and over again in Peel inspections. So this is, sorry, for people from other countries. So this is our inspection process. They inspect individual forces and then they do themed inspections on topics. And these issues come back over and over again. So it doesn't matter what the topic is, you keep coming back to the same things. And there's definitely work that we need to do there to tackle those things together. So the organisations, national organisations, need to do better. We're trying to do better to work on those things together, because otherwise, essentially what happens is you have a problem with supervision in domestic abuse, then you have it in mental health and you have it in stop and search, but you never tackle it because you're just having it popping up in action plans, in topics. And that's, you know, that's no way to solve it. So I was thinking about this in relation to the Vorg example, is it'd be really good if the really good victim care that was done in that training from Queensland is actually, they've already done the really good victim care. And in the programme, you get to concentrate just on the bit which is specific to Vorg. And I think that's a real challenge that we need to get better at. So we're working with our other national organisations, trying to become a slightly smarter system. And sort of more by luck than judgment, we've ended up with quite a good example of trying to do this on homicide prevention. So usually what happens is when there's a problem issue that everybody's concerned about, like homicide, so the minister, who's just gone, but until he went, was very concerned about homicide. So there was, you know, we usually will do something like a thematic inspection, as I described before, and we'll discover all the problems with how the police are policing homicide. And we will publish them in a report, and everyone will go, ooh, terrible, looks bad. All the forces have to do action plans, central organisations are given recommendations. And it's like, it doesn't look particularly great, and it takes us kind of 2 years, and do we really end up in a much better place? It's kind of arguable, I think, sometimes. So what we've tried to do here is say, right, can we flip it on its head? Can we start with, what do we understand about the problem? Work together as a set of organisations to say, what analysis have you got? What are you finding in inspection? What have you got, college? What have you got, IOPC? NPCC, what have you got? What information sources, what can we bring together to say, what do we understand about what's going on here? So that's number one. Number two, any extra data collection or, you know, problem profiles. So we were going to do a problem profile on homicide anyway, so that fitted really well. We said, right, okay, well, we can slot that in. NPCC had said they would create a framework of good ideas and good practice with us. So we're like, okay, well, that could be really good. So let's try and do that first. And then let's do all of that, and HMIC-FRS do your inspection at the end instead of the beginning. And everybody thinks this is a really good idea. Hooray! So we're going to try and do that for other things in the future as well. The issue is, of course, that politicians and others are impatient, and they quite like having inspection as a thing that they can waive. So we've had to work quite hard to try and find ways of making sure we are giving people things as we go along. But I think it's a model that can really work for us, where we'll have all of the examples of good practice up front. So, and this is where the other bit of kind of just trying to get it just right, and we'll see how we get on. So we're going to bring together what works evidence, great, but we're also going to ask forces, and we've done that already, for all of the good things they're doing on homicide. Some of those aren't evaluated. So what we'll do then is run a little panel and say to all the people who are involved, so the organisations I mentioned before, right, let's sift these examples by a set of criteria. we'll go and visit the ones that come out sort of in that SIFT, and we'll go and see whether we would recommend those to other forces, even though they haven't been evaluated yet. And we'll do that knowing that there is a risk involved in recommending things which haven't got a basis in evaluation, but we've got nothing else in those areas. So there's it's interesting, that territory for us, and obviously we will try and attach tests and evaluations to those new initiatives. So that's quite a nice way of trying to get that balance between the two things. And then we're also using all the good work forces have done already. So on the right, are you in here, Gavin? There he is over there, Gavin Barsley from Devon and Cornwall. They've done some fantastic work in forces already, of course. So one of the really good ones was the tagging for drug-related homicide. So it looks really bad. Drug-related homicides, like 40%, over 40%, oh no. Except when you actually do some more detailed analysis, the marker applies in drug-related, in the data set, applies to just whether the person has used drugs or that either of the people involved has used drugs. And actually, if you try and put the lens over it of, are we talking about drug market issue here? Is this actually to do with, a drugs problem? It drops right down. Was it about 17%, Gavin, I think? Yeah. And, that's a very different story to saying it's 40% to saying it's 17%. So we're trying to bring all those good pieces of analysis together and give us a framework that we can actually use. So then building on that, final thing is to try and take the experience of doing this on prevention and use that example to create a prevention and problem solving programme that can help more forces to have this embedded in the way they operate. Because we all know that it's still very much the case that forces are really up against it. It's still essentially a very reactive environment. There are only a few forces, I think, who have really managed that transition to sort of thinking prevention and problem solving first, because I think it's extremely challenging. It's a very difficult thing to do. So we're creating a programme of work, working with NPCC, so Serena Kennedy, who's the lead there, and all the other organisations, again, to try and create a way of saying, how do we help all forces to be really good at embedding prevention and problem solving, which feels to me like it's a really foundational thing in terms of being evidence-based, and so connected to that it has to be a big part of our mission. So that's where we've got to so far in terms of trying to get it just right in England and Wales in terms of that balance around evidence policing.
Rachel, I'll just say one thing. I teach at the University of West London on the PCDA and the DTAB.
Oh, yeah.
And my students are constantly in and out of the website. So that's
Hooray!
And the other thing I want to say is that the evidence-based policing is now part of your DNA. It's not something that you learn at university, which is just another subject area. It's something where you can actually demonstrate quite quickly in literally 20 minutes how to do it, and they recognise that they have been doing it without calling it evidence-based policing. So good
Brilliant.
for you.
Because Andy mentioned that the review of and the reshaping of a lot of the programmes that the college has been delivering, and some of which basically it inherited from NPIA, who inherited it from Centrex, who inherited it from National Police Training, who inherited it from Cain and Abel. So it strikes me that there's an opportunity and I thought the contribution from Brunel was timely, in that it's established. Evidence-based policing has got itself established in the PCDA and the other programmes that are going to be the core from next year on. This is a comment, but it's also a question. It is absolutely imperative that the most senior programme, the Strategic Command course, has a much clearer and much more focused approach on an evidence-based approach. It needs to set the standard and push in the way that we would expect of the most senior programme, and that then flows down through the piece.
So I actually do the module on evidence-based policing. Well, module is kind of a grand term for it. I do the bit, and it is a bit really, on evidence-based policing on the Strategic Command course. I sort of agree with you, but I think actually that's a fix too late. So, and we do stuff with them on CPD now as chief officers, so we've got more opportunities to do ongoing work with them, so it's not all about the strategic command course. But equally, I think if they only do it then, it's like people on the Cambridge course say, I wish I'd known this earlier. It's a bit late, so I think you're right, there should be attention to it, but it should be all the way through the ranks. And Matt Rose is sitting up there, give us a wave, Matt, from the college who runs the Senior Leadership Development Programme in the college. They do that all the way through, so we're getting better at it, but I wouldn't say that even on our courses we've got enough focus on it. Oh, and a quick one on data. So somebody mentioned yesterday, I can't remember who it was talking about the fact that we don't do very much yet on data science, and that is true. But we've done a piece of work with the Police Digital Service, and we're looking at what should be the right amount of data science learning for officers and staff throughout the system.